Welcome to the HFY Tales channel. Remember to like and subscribe if you like the story. Enjoy and take care.
Rylan leaned against the jagged rock formation, taking in the unfamiliar landscape. His once pristine uniform was dust-stained, torn from the week-long trek across this wild, alien world. The planet was rich in hues of violet and emerald, with sprawling forests of towering bioluminescent plants and glistening streams winding through the terrain. Earth's technology had faltered upon entering this atmosphere, leaving him stranded, disconnected from his ship and survival gear, forced to rely on wits alone. Just as Rylan moved to gather water from a nearby spring, he froze, hearing something, a soft, ethereal melody carried by the wind. Intrigued, he crouched low, edging closer to the sound. Peering through the dense foliage, he spotted her, a lone figure bathing in the crystal-clear spring. She was undeniably alien, yet captivatingly beautiful, her skin a pearly shade that seemed to catch the sunlight and shimmer like liquid crystal. Her features were delicate yet sharp, with eyes large and luminous, and her silken hair cascaded over her shoulders like a veil of moonlight. The mesmerizing sight held Rylan's attention for a moment too long, and he stumbled slightly, his foot catching a stray branch. The sharp snap echoed through the clearing, and the alien woman's head jerked up. Her bright eyes locked onto him, wide with surprise and a hint of wariness. Rylan raised his hands in a gesture of peace, feeling a surge of awkwardness as he grappled for words. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you." The alien didn't respond with words, but her head tilted, her expression one of intense curiosity. She rose slowly from the water, stepping toward him, her gaze never wavering. Rylan was acutely aware of her graceful, almost weightless movements and how she seemed to blend with her surroundings. She observed him with a mixture of intrigue and hesitation. After a tense moment of silence, Rylan slowly reached into his pack, pulling out a small container of water he'd purified earlier, offering it to her. He managed a small smile. She watched him closely, her gaze shifting from his face to the container in his hands. Taking it with gentle curiosity, she examined it, her fingers lightly brushing his as she did so. There was a pause, and then, with a tentative sip, she tasted the water. A hint of surprise lit up her expression, followed by a soft, appreciative sound. Rylan couldn't help but smile, relieved by her reaction. It was a small but significant step toward building trust between them. After a few quiet moments, the alien woman placed her hand on her chest and uttered a single word. "Zyra." Rylan's heart skipped a beat. Her voice was soft and melodic, like the gentle ripple of water over stones. "Rylan," he replied, pointing to himself. "Rylan." Zyra's head tilted again, and she repeated his name with a strange but endearing accent, making it sound almost musical. A tentative smile spread across her lips, transforming her face with warmth and welcome. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the alien forest, Rylan felt a strange yet undeniable bond beginning to form. Whatever this connection was, he knew one thing: this world and this encounter was about to change his life in ways he could never have imagined. The next morning, Rylan awoke to find Zyra watching him from a short distance, her head tilted in fascination. He gave a half nod, feeling a slight awkwardness as he brushed the dust from his uniform and stretched. Though still cautious, Zyra seemed more at ease today, her eyes less wary and more curious as they lingered on him. Rylan decided to try bridging the gap by gesturing and speaking slowly. "Food," he said, holding up a nutrient bar from his pack, then taking a bite to show her. Zyra's eyes narrowed slightly, her gaze fixed on the strange bar in his hand. She looked at him, then at the bar, evidently trying to understand his intent. Carefully, he extended the rest of the bar toward her, hoping to convey that it was safe to eat. Zyra's delicate fingers grazed his hand as she took the bar, studying it from all angles before tentatively taking a bite. Her face lit up, a delighted surprise flashing across her features as she savored the unfamiliar taste. She muttered something in her language, a string of soft, musical sounds that Rylan couldn't begin to interpret, though her pleasure was clear. Encouraged, he gestured around them, trying to express his admiration for her planet. "Your world is incredible, different from Earth." Zyra observed him, her gaze shifting from his face to his surroundings. With a quiet smile, she reached for a small pouch at her waist and pulled out a piece of her own food, a purple fruit that looked like a cross between a peach and a pear. She held it out to him, waiting. Rylan took a cautious bite, and his eyes widened as the flavor hit his taste buds. It was sweet and slightly tangy, refreshing after days of bland, nutrient bars. He gave her an appreciative nod. "Thank you, Zyra." The exchange felt significant, a small but meaningful gesture of mutual trust and curiosity. They were learning each other's ways, bridging the divide, bit by bit. Zyra motioned for him to follow her, and he did so, marveling at how she moved through the dense forest with ease, her steps almost silent. She showed him various plants along their path, tapping leaves and pointing out vibrant flowers with a pride that suggested they held unique properties. Rylan watched closely as she reached into her pouch and rubbed a particular leaf between her fingers, creating a soothing, aromatic oil that she lightly spread over her hands. As if sensing his interest, Zyra tapped her chest and said, "Salia." She pointed to the leaf, repeating, "Salia." It seemed to be her people's term for the plant, or perhaps the oil she'd extracted. Rylan smiled, repeating the word with his best attempt at her pronunciation. "Salia." Zyra's eyes brightened, and she nodded approvingly, pleased by his attempt. The two continued exploring side by side, with Zyra occasionally stopping to share small tidbits about her world. When they came upon a cluster of bioluminescent flowers, she gently pressed a finger against one, making it glow even brighter. She then guided his hand to do the same, smiling as the flower pulsed beneath his touch. Rylan couldn't hide his amazement. This planet was brimming with wonders. To reciprocate, he unzipped a pocket on his uniform, pulling out a small multi-tool he'd used for everything from navigation to food preparation. He pressed a button, causing a tiny holographic map to appear. Zyra's eyes widened in fascination, her hands instinctively reaching out to touch the light. Patiently, he showed her how the map could project the landscape around them, using gestures to explain as best he could. Zyra laughed softly, her laughter light and contagious as she attempted to manipulate the map herself. In return, she mimicked his gestures with a vine from a nearby plant, showing him that her people used natural markers to guide their way through the forests. The cultural exchange became a rhythm, a language of its own, as they shared their respective worlds, from simple technology to the flora and fauna unique to her home. Their initial wariness gave way to companionship, an unspoken understanding taking root between them. As dusk settled, they returned to the spring where they'd first met. Zyra sat beside him, her gaze softening as she looked at the evening sky, deep shades of purple and indigo casting a serene glow. Rylan felt compelled to break the silence. "Do you ever feel alone out here?" he asked, his voice low. Zyra didn't understand the words, but something in his tone seemed to reach her. She placed a hand gently on his, her touch delicate yet reassuring. Her fingers traced faint patterns on his skin, and he realized it was her way of communicating sympathy, a gesture that spoke of shared understanding without needing translation. She then began speaking softly, her voice carrying a note of sadness. Though Rylan couldn't comprehend her language, he sensed that she was telling him a story, perhaps of loss or solitude. Her gaze was distant, her eyes glistening faintly in the moonlight, as though remembering something painful. Rylan felt a pang of empathy. Placing his hand over hers and giving a slight nod, he murmured, "I don't understand, but I'm here." Zyra's lips curved into a small, grateful smile, her eyes meeting his with a newfound warmth. In that quiet moment, their mutual loneliness seemed to ebb, replaced by the comfort of shared company. The days passed in a gentle rhythm, each one bringing Rylan and Zyra closer as they explored the alien world together. Their silent companionship and shared curiosity made their interactions feel natural, each learning to read the subtle cues of the other. But tonight, Something felt different, a quiet, almost charged atmosphere as they sat near the spring. The only sounds the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional chirp of alien wildlife. Rylan glanced at Zyra, watching her gaze absently over the darkened treetops, the stars reflected in her large, luminous eyes. After a moment's hesitation, he decided to share a part of himself. He took a deep breath, his voice barely a whisper. I joined this mission to explore, to seek out new life, new experiences, maybe even find a purpose out here. But I wasn't expecting to end up stranded and alone on an alien world. He let out a rueful chuckle. Funny how life doesn't exactly follow the script we imagine. He knew she couldn't understand his words, but as he spoke, he felt an unburdening, as if simply sharing his thoughts could lighten the weight on his shoulders. Zyra's expression softened, and she placed her hand over his, sensing the gravity of his tone. Her touch was light, but warm, as though silently reassuring him that he was no longer alone. After a moment, Zyra sat up, glancing at him as though weighing whether to reveal something personal. She turned her gaze down to her hands, which were folded tightly in her lap. Slowly, she began to speak in her melodic language, her tone carrying a sadness that Rylan instinctively understood. Her words flowed softly, like a lullaby tinged with sorrow, as she gestured toward the horizon, where dark hills cast shadows under the starlit sky. Through gestures and expressions, she managed to convey fragments of her story. Rylan pieced together an image of her past, how she'd lost her family to an intertribal conflict, how the solitude of this wild land had become both her refuge and her prison. Rylan's heart ached for her. He didn't need to understand every detail to feel the depth of her loss. He reached over, touching her shoulder gently. Zyra glanced at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and offered a slight, grateful smile, a soft light breaking through the sadness. In that quiet moment, Zyra took his hand, pressing his palm to her chest, just over her heart. She then placed her hand over his heart, feeling the steady beat beneath her fingers. Her eyes held his, and she murmured something in her language, a phrase that seemed to resonate deeply. Rylan didn't know what she was saying, but he felt the sincerity, the gentleness of her touch, and the warmth it conveyed. Zyra seemed to explain, through her gestures, that her people expressed emotions through touch, a silent language reserved for close connections. It was a bonding ritual, a way of conveying empathy and comfort that required no words. Rylan returned the gesture, placing his hand gently over her heart as well. The simple act felt deeply intimate, creating an invisible thread that wove them closer together. Their gazes lingered, and for a fleeting moment, it was as though the boundaries between their worlds dissolved, replaced by a connection that defied reason or language. As their hands rested over each other's hearts, Zyra's expression turned inquisitive. Her gaze drifted down to his hands, then back to his face, as if asking a silent question about his form. Slowly, she traced his fingers with her own, her touch gentle yet curious. She studied his calloused hands, the roughness of his skin, noting the contrast to her own. Rylan couldn't help but smile at her innocent curiosity, and he gently lifted one of her hands, tracing the delicate lines that shimmered faintly against her iridescent skin. Zyra watched him with quiet fascination, her eyes glimmering as she observed the differences between them. At one point, Zyra brushed her fingers lightly over his cheek, the warmth of her touch sending a soft thrill through him. Her gaze was thoughtful, as if marveling at the textures and expressions unique to humans. Emboldened, she trailed her fingers along his jaw, down his neck, lingering on the pulse point. Rylan's heartbeat quickened, and Zyra looked up at him, her eyes widening slightly at the reaction. The moment stretched, the air between them thick with an unspoken understanding. They were two beings from distant worlds, yet the attraction that had simmered beneath the surface was now undeniable. As the night deepened, Zyra reached into a small pouch tied around her waist and pulled out a tiny vial. She opened it carefully, releasing a fragrant scent that seemed to calm the air around them. She dipped her fingers into the vial, coating them in a thin layer of shimmering oil, which she then spread over her hands. Carefully, She offered her hands to Rylan, gesturing for him to take some. Rylan allowed her to spread the oil over his hands, the warmth of her touch sending a shiver down his spine. She explained, through soft gestures, that this was a ritual of trust among her people, a symbol of shared energy and connection. The oil was made from the salvia plant she had shown him earlier, a substance used in bonding ceremonies that held a symbolic significance. As the oil settled on his skin, Rylan felt a subtle warmth, almost as if the essence of the plant was connecting them on a deeper level. They sat in comfortable silence, hands resting together, a quiet understanding passing between them. The following day dawned in soft hues of lavender and gold, bathing the landscape in a surreal glow. Rylan awoke to find Zyra already nearby, her gaze thoughtful as she stared out at the horizon. Today felt different, a quiet anticipation settling over them as they continued their exploration of her world. The bond between them had grown in ways Rylan hadn't anticipated, and he sensed Zyra felt it too. As they walked, Zyra led him toward a secluded grove, lush with flowers that emitted a warm, faint glow. She crouched down, picking a small, translucent fruit and holding it out to him with a hopeful look. She took a bite from her own, and with a subtle gesture, encouraged him to do the same. Rylan took a bite, savoring the sweet, slightly tangy flavor that reminded him of citrus with a hint of floral essence. Unbeknownst to him, this act held a deeper meaning. The shared fruit was a bonding custom, a tradition among her people symbolizing connection and trust. Rylan noticed Zyra's pleased expression as he chewed, but he was unaware of the significance that she attached to this simple act. As they continued their journey, Zyra watched him with an approving gleam in her eyes, as if acknowledging an unspoken commitment. Rylan caught her gaze and returned her smile, feeling a warmth he couldn't quite explain. Later that day, they stopped by a stream to rest. Rylan offered Zyra some of his food ration, a small container of juice he'd saved. As she took a sip, her eyes lit up, and she made a small, appreciative sound. She muttered something softly in her language, her tone conveying genuine delight. "Your juice is so sweet," she said, struggling slightly with the unfamiliar words. Rylan blinked, momentarily caught off guard by her innocent choice of phrasing, but quickly realized she was merely expressing enjoyment. He laughed softly, responding with a casual, "Glad you like it, Zyra." They shared a chuckle, each enjoying the moment of cultural exchange. To Rylan, it was simply a humorous misunderstanding, but to Zyra, it seemed to mark yet another step in their growing bond, a blend of innocence and attraction that felt both natural and new. That evening, Zyra led him to a quiet spot overlooking the forest, the landscape bathed in starlight. She seemed to sense his exhaustion, guiding him to sit beside her as she gently placed her hand on his shoulder. Her fingers traced light, intricate patterns along his arm, a silent gesture of comfort. "Your world," Rylan murmured, looking out at the breathtaking view. "It's incredible, but it's also intense. I've never felt so connected to a place, yet so far from home." Zyra listened quietly, her gaze never leaving him as she took in his words. She reached for his hand, entwining her fingers with his in a gesture that felt deeply personal. "I understand," she whispered in broken English, her accent thick yet charming. Her words resonated with genuine empathy, reflecting her understanding of his feelings. With her other hand, Zyra took a piece of jewelry from around her neck, a small, ornate pendant with swirling designs that glowed faintly in the dark. She held it out to him, her expression serious. Rylan hesitated, not wanting to accept something so personal, but she insisted, pressing it gently into his hand. "This is for protection," she explained, gesturing toward his heart as if to indicate that it held special meaning. "For courage." Touched by her gesture, Rylan placed the pendant over his neck, the cool metal warming against his skin. The gesture felt significant, almost like a silent promise between them. As the evening deepened, Zyra sat closer, her shoulder brushing his as they gazed at the starlit sky. Their eyes met, and an unspoken understanding passed between them. Slowly, as if testing the waters, Rylan lifted his hand to tuck a stray lock of her hair behind her ear. Zyra's eyes softened, and she leaned in, her gaze holding his as her fingers traced his jawline, studying him with curiosity and tenderness. Without words, they inched closer, drawn together by an invisible force that defied explanation. When their lips finally met, the kiss was gentle, almost tentative, a delicate blending of two worlds, an exchange of trust, warmth, and acceptance. Rylan's hand settled against her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin as the kiss deepened, their connection feeling both thrilling and strangely familiar, as though they had always been meant to find each other. When they finally broke apart, Zyra looked at him, her expression a mixture of wonder and contentment. "Rylan," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. His name sounded different on her lips, filled with a depth of meaning that went beyond mere affection. They stayed together in silence, feeling the weight of the moment and the bond they had just cemented. They had crossed a boundary that night, not just physically but emotionally, each willing to embrace the unknown for the sake of the connection they'd forged. The days passed in a tranquil rhythm, and Rylan found himself feeling more at home on Zyra's world than he ever would have thought possible. The alien flora, the songs of unfamiliar creatures, the gentle sway of bioluminescent trees, they all became part of a new life that felt both surreal and real at the same time. He and Zyra continued exploring, sharing stories through gestures and bridging gaps with laughter and gentle touches. Their bond had become unmistakable, something unspoken yet deeply felt. But peace is fragile, and their newfound harmony was about to be shattered. Late one afternoon, as they walked through a dense grove of shimmering trees, a sudden noise broke the stillness, a rustle, then a guttural growl. Zyra stopped in her tracks, her body going rigid, her eyes darting around in fear. Rylan didn't have to ask. He knew something was wrong. Before he could react, a group of alien figures emerged from the shadows, their bodies cloaked in dark, tattered robes. Their faces were partially hidden, but their hostile intent was clear. Zyra's expression was a mixture of fear and fury. She whispered something under her breath, clenching her fists. Rylan instinctively stepped in front of Zyra, his stance protective. The alien figures seemed to understand the gesture, and one of them laughed, a chilling sound that made Rylan's skin crawl. They began to speak in rapid, harsh tones, their eyes glinting with malice as they looked from Zyra to Rylan. It was clear they didn't approve of her companionship with him. Rylan knew he had no choice. His survival instincts kicked in, and he assessed his surroundings for anything he could use to defend them. A sharp stick lay on the ground nearby, primitive but better than nothing. He grabbed it, positioning himself between Zyra and the approaching figures, his eyes narrowing in determination. "Stay behind me," he muttered, not sure if she would understand, but hoping his tone conveyed his intent. The alien attackers closed in, their movements quick and predatory. Rylan swung the stick, blocking one of their blows and forcing them back. He moved with calculated precision, using every ounce of his training to defend them both. One by one, he deflected their strikes, but the attackers were relentless, and fatigue was setting in. Suddenly, one of the aliens lunged at Zyra, and Rylan acted without thinking. He threw himself between them, taking the brunt of the attack as the alien's blade grazed his shoulder. Pain shot through him, but he grit his teeth, standing his ground. Seeing Rylan wounded seemed to ignite something in Zyra. Her eyes narrowed, and she took a step forward, her posture changing from defensive to fierce. She muttered a phrase in her language, raising her hands in a motion that seemed to summon energy from the very earth beneath them. Her skin began to glow faintly, and a surge of power emanated from her as she focused on their attackers. Rylan watched, stunned, as Zyra unleashed her hidden strength. She raised her hand, and a ripple of energy shot through the ground, knocking one of the attackers off balance. The others hesitated, clearly taken aback by her power. Zyra took advantage of their shock, gesturing in a way that sent pulses of energy toward each attacker, forcing them to retreat. The remaining aliens scrambled back, muttering amongst themselves as they threw wary glances at Zyra. With a final, threatening gesture, Zyra made it clear they weren't welcome, and the attackers retreated into the forest, leaving Rylan and Zyra alone once more. As the forest returned to its quiet stillness, Rylan sank to the ground, clutching his shoulder where he'd been wounded. Zyra knelt beside him, her expression filled with concern. She gently pulled his hand away, examining the wound, and muttered softly in her language, her voice laced with worry. From her pouch, she retrieved a small vial of the Salia oil, dipping her fingers into it before carefully applying it to his shoulder. The oil tingled as it touched his skin, soothing the pain almost instantly. Rylan winced, but her gentle hands eased the discomfort, and he felt a sense of relief wash over him. "Thank you," he whispered, meeting her gaze. "You saved us back there. I had no idea." Zyra shook her head, placing a hand over his heart, her touch a silent reassurance. She spoke softly, her words barely audible, but her eyes held a determination that made her intentions clear. She would protect him, just as he had protected her. It was no longer just about survival or companionship. It was something deeper, a bond forged in trust and mutual sacrifice. As they sat together, Zyra leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand still resting over his heart. They remained in silence, the gravity of the moment settling between them. Rylan felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for her help, but for the connection they'd formed. "Whatever comes next," he murmured, "we face it together." Zyra looked up, her gaze softening. She nodded, the faintest smile curving her lips. Though they still had much to face, they knew they could rely on each other, their bond stronger than ever. The attack had left Rylan and Zyra physically unscathed but emotionally stirred. That night, as they returned to the secluded grove, an unspoken understanding passed between them, a sense that they were now bound together in ways that went beyond simple companionship. They had defended each other, faced danger together, and in doing so, forged a bond that neither could ignore. As they sat by the fire Zyra had kindled, Rylan studied her in the flickering light. She looked serene, her face cast in a warm glow, her gaze fixed on the flames as though lost in thought. Rylan hesitated, his voice soft as he spoke. "Zyra, I'm grateful for you. I don't think I would have survived this world without you." Zyra looked up, her eyes filled with something deeper than words. She took his hand, placing it over her heart as she had done before, but this time, her touch lingered, her gaze more intense. "You my protector," she said in her accented voice, the English words laced with emotion. Rylan's heart beat faster as he realized the depth of her feelings. Slowly, he reached for her face, his hand gently cupping her cheek. Zyra leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly before opening to meet his gaze. The distance between them disappeared as they drew closer, their breaths mingling in the quiet night air. Their lips met in a kiss, tender and gentle at first, as though testing the waters of this new territory. But as the moment deepened, so did their embrace. Zyra's hands traveled up his arms, her touch sending a thrill through him as he held her close, feeling the warmth of her body against his. In that kiss, they exchanged more than mere affection. It was a merging of their worlds, an affirmation of the bond they had built. For Rylan, it felt like coming home after a long journey. For Zyra, it was a promise of trust and belonging, one that transcended the barriers between them. When they finally parted, Rylan rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathless, their hands still intertwined. Zyra's smile was soft, her eyes shining with emotion. She spoke a phrase in her language, her tone filled with warmth and sincerity, and though he couldn't understand the words, he felt their meaning in his heart. After a quiet moment, Zyra rose, taking his hand and leading him deeper into the grove. They walked in silence, the cool night air surrounding them as the forest seemed to pulse with energy. Zyra led him to a small clearing where glowing flowers bloomed in abundance, their light casting an ethereal glow over everything. She gestured for him to kneel beside her in the center of the clearing. Once they were seated, she took a small, delicate vial from her pouch, the same shimmering oil from the Salia plant. Carefully, she dipped her fingers into it and spread a small amount on his forehead, tracing a symbol there before doing the same to herself. Zyra spoke softly, explaining that this was a ritual among her people, a sacred union that bound two beings in trust, love, and mutual respect. The act was more than a simple bond. It symbolized the merging of their spirits, a commitment to protect and cherish each other. Rylan felt the significance of her words, the weight of the moment settling on him. He mimicked her gesture, applying the oil to her forehead, tracing a gentle line as she had done for him. As he did so, a surge of warmth filled him, a sense of connection that transcended anything he had ever known. They closed their eyes, holding hands as they sat in silence, letting the energy of the ritual wash over them. In that moment, they were no longer two separate beings but one, bound together by something ancient and profound. The forest around them seemed to pulse with approval, as though bearing witness to their union. As they finally lay down together beneath the stars, their hands still entwined, Rylan felt a sense of peace and belonging unlike anything he had ever experienced. Zyra curled against him, her head resting on his chest as they drifted into a deep, shared sleep. That night, their dreams mingled, their thoughts and memories blending in a way that felt both surreal and natural. In their dreams, they saw each other's worlds, the vast oceans of Earth, the mountains of Zyra's homeland, the faces of loved ones long lost. They traveled together through memories, sharing their joys, sorrows, hopes, and fears. It was a communion of souls, a glimpse into each other's innermost selves. When morning broke, Rylan awoke to find Zyra watching him with a soft, contented smile. She placed a gentle kiss on his forehead, her eyes filled with a quiet joy. They didn't need words. Everything they needed to say had been spoken in that sacred union. As dawn broke over the alien horizon, Rylan and Zyra stood hand in hand, watching the light spill across the landscape. The night they'd shared, the ritual they'd completed, had transformed their bond into something sacred and enduring. They were no longer simply two travelers on different paths. They had become inseparable, united in both spirit and purpose. Rylan touched the pendant Zyra had given him, feeling the weight of its significance. It was no longer just a token. It was a symbol of the life they had chosen to share, regardless of the differences between them. He turned to Zyra, her gaze as steady and fierce as ever, and smiled. "Zyra," he said softly, brushing a strand of her hair back. "I don't know what the future holds, but I want to face it with you." Zyra's expression softened, and she gave a single, resolute nod. She lifted her hand to his chest, over his heart, and spoke a phrase in her language, the same words she had whispered to him during their union. Rylan didn't understand the exact translation, but he felt its meaning resonate within him, an affirmation of loyalty, trust, and enduring love. In her native tongue, Zyra said, "Together we walk forward, sharing every step." And though her English was broken, she repeated, "Together forever." As they returned to their camp by the spring, Rylan realized that their journey was just beginning. They needed a way to survive in the long term, a means to find shelter and communicate with others, perhaps even find a way to reconnect with his people, though the thought of leaving her side now felt almost unthinkable. Zyra, sensing his contemplation, took his hand and led him deeper into the forest. She showed him a hidden network of caves nestled beneath the sprawling roots of ancient trees, a place her people had once used as a refuge during times of war. With some work, they could make it a secure and comfortable home. Rylan marveled at her resourcefulness, his admiration for her growing with every step. Together, they spent hours exploring the caves, planning how they would transform them into a safe haven. Zyra shared her knowledge of edible plants and medicinal herbs, teaching him to identify the resources they'd need to thrive. In the following days, they fell into a rhythm, building a life together with a sense of purpose that felt both natural and fulfilling. Rylan had found not only love, but also a reason to stay, a purpose beyond exploration and survival. He felt a deep satisfaction as he learned to live off the land, adapting to Zyra's ways while sharing his knowledge of Earth and technology with her. At one point, Zyra brought him to the edge of a cliff that overlooked a vast valley, stretching as far as the eye could see. She pointed to the sky, and with a hopeful smile, she said, "One day return. Share world." Rylan realized then that, although this place had become his new home, there was a part of him that wanted to bridge the worlds, Earth and hers, human and alien. The thought of finding a way to bring his people and hers together filled him with a sense of purpose, a dream of unity that he hadn't dared to imagine before. On the final night, as they sat by the fire beneath a canopy of stars, Rylan took Zyra's hand, their fingers intertwining. They spoke of the days to come, of their plans to build a life that honored both their worlds. Zyra rested her head on his shoulder, her eyes reflecting the flames, a look of quiet contentment on her face. In the warm silence, Rylan felt an overwhelming gratitude for this new life, a sense of belonging that made the uncertainties of the future seem less daunting. He wrapped an arm around Zyra, pulling her close as they gazed at the stars together, feeling the weight of their shared dreams and the strength of their bond. Though the future was unknown, they knew one thing with certainty. They would face it side by side, their love a bridge between worlds, a testament to the power of trust, courage, and unity.